this book is how anyone can be sucked into that. You know, here's the gymnastics that I went through. It wasn't a character flaw. It was, you know, how someone can get sucked into a cult, an abusive relationship, and stay.
I'm glad we're talking after, like a little while after I read the book, because it took me a while to like process it.
Yes.
Was it hard for you to write? Was it traumatic to write, or was it cathartic?
It was cathartic for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, it felt great.
And I mean, you had a good amount of separation between the events of the book and then writing about it.
Yes, definitely.
Did you have to wait? Were you like, because my generation of American Apparel employees, and the reason I think there haven't been more books, is there were all sorts of legal paperwork that everyone had to sign. And I wondered if things were a little sloppier at the beginning, which I assume they were.
Yeah, I think that they were, for sure. There was, when I was even just selling this book, there was a lot of talk, you know, what did you sign?
Yeah.
And in my memory, I really held on to everything. Anything I'd signed.
Really?
I still had my severance agreement. I had everything. But there was really nothing that was too, the severance agreement was pretty standard. But yeah, a lot of agents and stuff were a little flipped out. But surprisingly, going through that legal read, there was very little stuff I had to change.
Yeah, I just thought the book was perfect, especially the beginning, because you're what, at Union Station or something, right? I forget where you were, but you get handed a piece of paper that's basically a flyer for a cult, and you're like, no, I would never do such a thing.
Yeah. Yes, I'm at the Glendale Galleria,
yes,
a very important landmark in Los Angeles.
You know, that's where the first Apple store was.
Oh, no way!
Yeah.
Oh, I know that Apple store. That's my Apple store.
There you go.
Oh, that's so crazy.
Yeah.
Yes, I was confronted by this cult girl who just looked like a regular college girl. She had on a Northridge t-shirt, and she told me she had a prophecy for me, which sort of piqued my interest. And then she said, it's about the mother god. You know, do you know the mother god? And right there I was like, oh no, I'm in California. Here's my first cult experience. I've been here a week.
Sure.
It was very obvious. And then later, you know, when I was scouted for American Apparel, it was, you know, just as explosive of a pitch,
yes,
but way more appealing to me.
Right, one appeals to the ego, the other sort of spiritual, and then the other one is a job and exciting and interesting and all these things that sort of get your defenses down, but then ultimately, you know, it has a similar dynamic, I feel like.
Oh, definitely.
Do you like, did you come to see it that way after that you had sort of been in some kind of a cult? Or is it cult-ish? Have you heard that word? It's like cult-ish. It's
yes,
like
that wonderful book by Amanda Montell.
Yeah.
Exactly. If you would have told me then, you're in a cult, I would have said, this is my job. I'm getting a paycheck. Never, ever would I. But there were certain dynamics about it that were culty. I mean, even then, that felt good. You know, everyone's looking for a sense of place and purpose and identity, especially when you're 23. And I think Charney really harnessed that. He, you know, created this neverland of young, ambitious people that were still children in a sense, and very easy to manipulate. And I was one of them.
Oh, yeah, me too. I mean, my first visit to the factory, I saw him first at his house. I met him there, and
at the little house or the big house?
The big one, which we should talk about. But which was a surreal experience. It was at night. You're looking down at LA from this like multi-million-dollar mansion. I'd never met anyone like that. But I remember he said something like, I want to show you the factory. Come down, like in a couple of days. And I went down to the factory, which is in the warehouse district of downtown Los Angeles. You drive through Skid Row. You have no idea what to expect. And then you pull up this enormous building, which when I was there still had the same banners that you're talking about in the book. American Apparel is an industrial revolution.
Those banners are still on the building.
Really?
It's very unusual. What are they doing up there?
It's probably hard to take down. I mean, they were two of the biggest buildings I'd ever seen in my life. I mean, it's 800,000 square foot buildings, and they've been there for 100 years or something. So I walk in, you take that janky elevator up you're talking about, and then I was supposed to meet him on one of the floors, and I meet him. He's sort of on the move, And we walk through this cafeteria, which I'm sure it was the same one. And then all of a sudden you're just on the floor of a factory where like these sewing machines are going and people are, I don't think I'd ever been in one before. People are making these shirts at this like lightning pace. And as he's walking down the thing, everyone stops and they get up and they just start cheering. And I was like, what is this? That wasn't the cult in the sense that these were, young, but these were like factory workers who had been so changed by the decisions that he'd made. Like they owed this guy was their ticket to the American dream in an incredible way. And I remember seeing that and I was just sort of in it then,
That's the moment. I had that exact same experience. They were getting up on their chairs. And now that I think about it, does that happen every day?
I don't know. Did he ask for that in some way?
How? Yeah, that's so interesting. Did he? But, and I'm sure you feel this way too, but, when people look back in hindsight, how could you stay? How could you have stayed? That moment is all you need to firm your resolve that this is a good place. This is a place that's making a difference, and I want to be a part of this.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about these cults, right, a cult is sort of promising all these things that potentially in the future this could happen. This is this path to acquisition, all these sort of ephemeral spiritual promises, right? Which, depending on who you are and what you're going for, that could be very attractive. I think what was very different about American Apparel is that shit was real. That was a real building with making millions of garments, making hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And there were real people who were not like the people that I grew up with, who were like, this guy is doing a thing that shouldn't be possible and is life-changing and amazing. And you're just like, I want to be a part of that.
Absolutely. And I still believe in that business model. It's very complicated.
It is incredibly complicated.
It can be done somewhat seemingly easily. We desperately need those factory jobs back here. Can we do it? Let's do it.
Well, I
know it's not that simple, but
he was doing it. Do you know what I mean? It's not like he had this sort of promise. It's not even like a WeWork thing where you're like, this is this. It's a revolution theoretically. Like it was real. It was happening. It was making stuff, and this stuff was good. And
I thought I would work there for the rest of my life. Did you?
I don't know if I thought I'd work there the rest of my life. So my relationship with American Apparel, I think fundamentally why the cult never got me is that I always wanted to be a writer. And I met Dove through Robert Greene, who wrote The 40 Laws of Power, we talk about in the book. And so I always kind of had one foot in and one foot out in that I really want to do this thing and it was really exciting and I thought I could learn all this stuff. And I also thought it would be a way to make money and then be secure. So, but I always had this other thing that I was doing. And I think fundamentally what cults do, and partly what made the American Apparel dynamic work, is he was really picking people who didn't have anything else going on or any other options. And then it becomes your world. And then as you get isolated from regular people and the rest of the world, your sense of what's normal and not normal goes away.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. That's the story of striptease.
Yeah, totally. Well, and you don't, when you're 23, you don't see yourself as a child.
Oh, no. I had it all figured out. I had it all figured out. No one was going to get me. But yeah, you are brands. You are wet behind the ears.
I met Dove before I could legally drink. And so
that's crazy. How old were you? Were you 21?
I turned 21 a month after I started.
Oh my gosh, that's so crazy. I was 23, so I was almost on the old lady side. I was one of the elders there. And when I left, I was 27 or 28, and then I certainly was.
Right.
Yeah,
but you don't when you're 20 or 23 or whatever, you're like, I'm great. I have all these things up. You don't think I don't know shit, right? Yeah. And so you can't even go, why does an adult want to hire me? Why do they want this, right?
Yes,
and the reason they want it is because you're a child and you don't know shit, right?
Yes. People will say, well, why didn't you rebel?
Yeah.
Why? I thought I was rebelling. We were in this subversive company that was changing. We were rebelling. We were revolting. That. I was doing all of those things that I thought the kind of person that I would do at 23.
Right. Yeah. You don't see him as the man, and you don't.
No.
You see everyone else working regular jobs, doing regular things. They're the man, which is kind of the dynamic of what a cult does, or any tribal dynamic, which is like, how do you make it us versus them? So then you don't think about what's weird about you. You only think what's wrong with them. And then as the media attention or the outside criticism comes in, it has the very insidious effect of actually making you dig in deeper to the thing.
Absolutely. Any friends that I had, what are you doing working there? It just, you don't know. It solidified my feelings I was in the right place. It just pushed me deeper and deeper and deeper in.
When you talk about this in the book, it's like you think you're winning, and no part of you is like, you're making like $12 an hour. You know what I mean? You're not winning. Like, this isn't, you have no sense of how it works anywhere else. That's why you were picked. And so like you can't see yourself as a victim. And so you're missing the fact that even if this was like, you're not even like being mercenary, because you're not being paid enough to be mercenary, you know?
Totally. I know, it's so shocking. It's so shocking. Yeah. It's
weird. There's not that many people who can talk about it, because...
Well, that's why I was so looking forward to our conversation, because no one really knows. And I was like, what is this going to be like? Because he really knows. And I mean, I was there during the party. Yeah. And you were there during the fall.
Well, yeah, you were there. It's weird, right? Like, I felt like I was there early because it had just gone public. But yeah, I mean, even when you were there, it was... I mean, he'd been doing it for people who don't know the American Apparel story. He started in his dorm room at Choate, the elite boarding school on the West Coast. And so he'd been in that business for 20 years or 15 years. And then I didn't come along until like years after you. So it kind of had these different eras.
Yeah, it did.
But
yeah, when I started, I mean, there were people there with far more seniority than I was the new girl. Yeah. But really, I was there right at the start.
Yeah, you were there before any of the negative press, really, or that started while you were there.
Well, I think really the first thing was the Jane magazine interview with Claudine Coe. And that was before I started working there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was maybe 6 months before I started.
Okay.
And that is where we got flyer bombed. It was like maybe my first month of work. Overnight, these, wheat pasters showed up and put flyers all over the store. And they said, the outside of the store and the street and Sunset Boulevard and everywhere. And they said, obey your master Bader, B-A-I. It was like an interesting pun. And that was a reference to that Jane magazine article. And I was sort of like, the manager was like, get into action, Dove. It could be here any minute. I was like frantically peeling them off, and I ended up saving one. And really, it was at that moment when I peeled it off, it was like intact, and I kind of tucked it away. And I thought, I'm going to write about this someday. Wow. I'm going to write about this someday for sure. I had studied writing in college, and I was always sort of, I knew there would be some story I was going to write, and that was it. And I even told people, I'm going to write about this. Yeah, sure. No one believed me. Yeah. It took a while, but yeah.
It's kind of remarkable you have these moments like that, and I do too, where you're like, how is that not the beginning and the end of it?
Exactly.
But the mind finds a way to make it make sense, or for sure, not make it urgent or whatever.
Yeah. Also, a big factor is, I mean, it seems like it's so close in our rear view, but 20 years ago was like a very different time culturally. Yes. Especially in that moment of celebrity sex tapes and upskirt shots, and the girls had gone wild. And that's true. And I, as a feminist coming out of this like feminist college, wanted to, be a sexually autonomous being and really sort of like embrace my sexuality. And here was this company that was so in your face, so open. I really felt like that was the next step in my feminist evolution.
It made sense maybe within the overall vibe of like sexual positivity. Yeah, you weren't supposed to be judging people. There wasn't supposed to be aberrant behavior. Everything was normal or on some kind of spectrum. And maybe everyone has this sense that there are lines, but like, because they weren't clear, it made it easy for or it made it possible for people to kind of play the different groups off of each other.
For sure. Definitely. And I mean, I'm still a sexually positive creature. But American Apparel was, there's a lot of good things about it, but it was really sex positivity to the point of toxicity.
Of course.
Like anything in the patriarchy, you can't get all the good stuff.
Yeah, it's so strange. So okay, so you basically get flyered off the street, and you have no idea that this thing is going to change the course of your life.
Mm-hmm. You mean when I get scouted?
Yeah.
Yes,
and then you just you start the way most people started at American Apparel, which is you started as a retail employee.
Yes. And I was like, I had just spent a year writing at the Urban Outfitters headquarters. And so I was like, I have other skills here.
Yeah.
Like I could be copywriting. I could,
Sure.
That's what I've been doing. They're like, no, you stay here.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be a part so bad. A part of things so bad that I did it anyway. They're like, here's the key. And I showed up on time. I brought my East Coast work ethic where I showed up on time. They're like, whoa, you're in charge. And, I sort of stuck myself there. Oh, yeah, it was definitely a real job. And it felt like a real job. It gave me health insurance.
Sure.
It did pay a few dollars over what other retail jobs paid. In the long run, Urban Outfitters also really underpaid me. I was making the same, but I was in charge. I thought I was in charge. I had more responsibility and I felt more important. I felt like I was a part of things.
Have you thought about what part of you it was or what it was that made you want to be a part of it so bad?
Yeah. I've always sort of, wanted to operate on the fringes of things. And, I came from like a punk rock background and it always felt good to rebel. Even going to Bryn Mawr, which is such like a feminist institution, was a way to rebel. And so here is even another way to take it further.
Yeah.
I think that some of the girls, have like a sense of sort of like vulnerability about them that made them, I don't know where I'm going with this, that made them easier to be victimized in a way. And maybe I didn't have that sort of vulnerability, which is why I didn't, wasn't a Dove girl or didn't get wrapped in. But I don't know, that might be a little victim blaming.
No, there's a childlikeness to most of the girls that why does my phone? I have never once turned on Siri on my watch on purpose, only on accident. No, there was this sort of mix of like adultness and childlikeness in the women that were in the company.
Oh, definitely.
Which sort of also is true of Dove also.
Of course, yes.
But yeah, there was kind of a childlikeness.
Yeah. Well, because of his behavior, his sense of humor. Only teenagers are going to tolerate that shit. Like
That's
if
true,
I had a boss
sure.
doing that, I'd be like, no.
Yes.
No way. And not because of my experience with American Apparel, just because of how I've grown and who I am now and culturally and all that stuff.
Yeah, this is getting far afield, but I've always thought that's like, it's a strange thing we don't kind of talk about. Like the older man who's attracted to younger women. Mm-hmm. I've never gotten you're 40 and she's 20. You exist in different universes. There's something. How are you spending time together? Do you know what I mean? Like so I always found it remarkable, and probably should have also seen more alarm bells. But it was like this was a person who was incredibly smart, incredibly successful, incredibly wealthy, incredibly powerful, incredibly stressed out, and he wanted to be surrounded by what were effectively children. There's a Michael Jackson-ness to it where you are clearly running from a kind of a real life.
Yes, for sure. Yes, Neverland.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right, and the Playboy Mansion is a version of Neverland, and the house was a version of that.
Yes, the big house.
I lived on just down from Apex Drive. I lived downtown, and at one point, and again, these things all seem like they make sense. He was like, I'll pay you to move closer to me. Mm-hmm. And he gave me like $5,000 to move to this house where I could see his house from my house.
Yes.
And I was like, it was obviously so he could call me at 2 a.m. and be like, I need you. And I'd have to go up there, and it was never urgent. There was never anything important. It was always just something that a person with better boundaries would have waited until the next day to type in an email or whatever. But then the weird part about sort of those dynamics is there's the person who doesn't have good boundaries, and then the person who doesn't recognize that the other person, you know what I mean? Like, why would you want to live close to your boss? That's insane.
Yes.
And so it's this mutually reinforcing dynamic that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
So weird.
And only youth would fall for that.
Yeah, because an older person would have kids or a spouse or hobbies, or they would live in Northridge because they couldn't afford to live in LA, and they would commute it. Like, there'd be all these things that would make that not.
They would never answer the phone at 2 a.m. when your boss is calling.
Well, so I think that. So I feel like I kind of got saved in the sense that, and I never did anything that I never did anything that got me in trouble. I never got sucked into it. I never went too far in because, one, I always wanted to be a writer, so I always had this other stuff going on, and I didn't really want a job. You know what I mean? Like, the whole point was like, how do I not have a job?
Yes.
And then I'd been with my wife. How long? I've been with my wife maybe a year. We weren't married, but we've been dating a year, and we stayed together the whole time. We're still together now. So
through your American Apparel experience.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
So because of that, I never I never could have lived in the house. I never wanted to live in the house. I never wanted to do any of the things that I think people sort of told themselves were the unpaid benefits of working there.
Yes.
And in fact, I had to steer clear of things. I didn't want to get in trouble, right? And so it was like, it just sort of set up these guardrails that I think.
You have one foot in the real world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you're 22, a man or a woman, you're just like, you don't have anything going on.
Yeah.
And so you're like, this house is nicer than my house or whatever,
Absolutely.
Or the whole structure is designed to sort of alienate and disconnect you from stuff. You're traveling, you're staying not even in your own hotel room. It's just weird.
I was so disconnected even from my family. Like, that moment in time, I wasn't going home. I was sort of like avoiding their calls because I was so that was my world. Did
you feel like you were a really important career woman?
I was the most important one there. I was doing their hiring.
Yeah.
I mean, I was totally deluded.
In the sense of like you had a cell phone and it was ringing all the time, and you were traveling for things that you would have to work your way up a corporate hierarchy at a normal company to get to do.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're playing pretend. Like, I was the director of marketing of a company that I had no business being that.
Yeah.
But I had the keys to the car.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
people were making my travel arrangements for me. I was flying to new cities to scout locations. Like, what did I know about which storefront was going to be the best location? Like, I had no idea. But I mean, well, this one's good. It's near the Apple store. Okay.
Yes. So you can have the cognitive dissonance there as you have total imposter syndrome, right? Like, I have no business being there. I have to quit. This is insane. Or you go, actually, I am qualified to do this. And this is not insane. This is different, but actually the old way of doing it is crazy. This is actually the best way to do it. And I'm special. And they saw me.
Oh, yeah.
And that's
what it is. That's what it was for me. I think that's what it was for a lot of the girls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. You feel chosen, and then that blinds you to the signs that maybe this is more random than you'd like to admit, or based on something else you would like not to admit.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's fascinating.
It's totally fascinating. And I think people should hear about it because it's not like, oh, this is this weird thing that these two people experience, but this is also how people get into weird industries that they don't understand. This is how people back political candidates or take jobs. You tell yourself it's going to be different for me. You tell yourself, oh, I'm not like those other people. It's different with me. And what you're doing is you're just working you're sort of dulling your conscience, you're dulling your sense of awareness, and you're just getting yourself deeper and deeper into something that in a lot of cases it becomes really hard to get out, if not impossible.
It's like any abusive relationship.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think still being with my wife, I think we have had to work through stuff, like, because we would get in arguments where she'd be like, that's insane.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I'd be like, what? This is my job, you know? And so it was like this process, like she probably feels gaslit by me, but I wasn't aware of what was, like gaslighting, I feel like requires a certain awareness of what you're doing. Yes. It's like a person who's being fooled fools other people, right? Yes. And so there's this weird dynamic that it's taken me a long time to have to process and get out of.
You were so fortunate to have someone who wasn't in the company, which is, he encouraged us to date within the company,
of course,
because of reasons like that.
Yeah.
There's a podcast about American Apparel where there's this heated debate. I forget who it is, or I don't think I knew the woman, but she was defending herself or just talking about working for American Apparel, and her partner was in the other room, and he's like, I'm sorry, but I have to interject.
Really?
And he's the voice of reason. He's saying, and she's like, her point is, you don't understand because you're not there. You don't know what's really going on.
Sure.
And that's, that's what I would have said too.
Yeah.
It's so obvious to anyone looking at the situation what's going on, but you are so wrapped up in these cult dynamics and your sense of purpose and tying your identity to the way that you're making money, which is something that I will never do again. I really conflated the way I paid rent with my identity. And
when it's so funny that money is even entering here because you're making like 40 grand a year. Yes. Like you know what?
I never made it to 40. I think I topped out at like $32,000.
Yes.
That's what I made when I left.
Which was more then, but like, it's not
still not enough.
Well, you would sense from the outside that people were sort of debasing themselves or doing things that are potentially have ramifications later in your career. You go, oh, it's for the money. Mm-hmm. And usually money is way down on the list of motivating factors. Like you go, why are these people working for this political candidate, or why are people working in this industry? Money is part of it, sure. Mm-hmm. And some industries more than others.
Yep.
But usually it's a lot less than you think.
Yep.
Even like porn, they're not cleaning up.
Yeah.
There's other things that have happened first that get you to rationalize it and be okay with it and even find a positive good in it. Mm-hmm. And then the money is just, maybe the money is the one you tell yourself because it's the most logical and the most socially acceptable even, but it's not even the case.
Yeah. It's so true.
Like, it's not like there were private jets or like, you go, I'm staying in a company apartment, and it's like, what were they paying for that company apartment? Like $2,000. Like, it's not, these weren't like your corporate condos that you see in like an episode of Billions or something.
These were like dumps. I remember the apartment in San Francisco was in the Tenderloin. Like, oh, here I am in the Tenderloin.
I was going to ask you, maybe this is one area we intersected. Were you the one that scouted the location in the Mission District in San Francisco? Did you pick that store?
I don't think so. I did a lot of scouting up there for the like whatever was in the Stanford area. That was like
Palo Alto?
Yeah, Palo Alto.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I didn't. I don't think I did anything there. I had to stay. I stayed in the Tenderloin when I was doing the Palo Alto stuff because that's where the company apartment was.
I have stayed in that apartment. Yeah. So one of my first, like, it was sort of, into the furnace, like, or they throw you into the deep end. I probably worked there for like 3 weeks, and you have to go up to San Francisco and do this thing. I go, what? Yeah. And they go, so there's some like protest about one of the stores, and what had happened was, someone like you had gone like, I think we should open a store here. Mm-hmm. And so they'd signed a 10-year lease on a building in the Mission District. Not the landlord probably knew this the whole time and saw him as an easy mark. But there was a stipulation in like the business district that you couldn't open if you had more than 10 locations, you were considered a big box retailer, and you had to go through a special approval process to exist in the Mission District.
Oh,
it was a way to keep out big corporations. Yeah. They didn't want like a Walmart
Starbucks
or something.
There,
yeah. And so, American Apparel had like 100 stores at this point.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so they just signed the lease. And so, and American Apparel, just flying by the seat of its pants, had put up signs, "We're coming."
Yep.
And all of a sudden, this huge protest, like, "Hey, they're trying to break the rules," whatever. And so there was like a city council meeting or whatever, and they just sent me, a person who worked there like for 3 weeks. I'm like 21. They were just like, "Go fix this," which was exciting on the one hand. And then obviously later did I realize I was like a lamb being led to slaughter. So I go up there, and they told me I had 5 minutes to speak. And I get up there first, and I forget how it went. It was like, it was supposed to start at a certain time. We had to wait all this time. And you're just seeing like hundreds of people are just lining up to speak in this thing. God. And you can see a picture of me. I'm wearing like a gray American Apparel button up, and it's just like black, just down the sides. I'm like sweated totally through this shirt. And I get up there and supposed to speak for like 5 minutes. They go, "Actually, there's so many people, you have 2 minutes."
Yeah.
And so I get up there, I speak for 2 minutes. And
what did you say?
You know, like, we didn't know, like, I don't know, like, I wrote some speech, right? That I'm sure nobody had approved. I had no idea what I was doing. I give this speech. And then like, "Okay, that's the representative from American Apparel. You sit down here, and now we'll hear from the community." And then, in my recollection, like 200 people spoke. One right after another, all directing their very angry comments directly at me.
You.
Not a single person spoke in favor of it. And then, of course, the store never opened, and the company took a huge bath. The Mission has now since been totally gentrified.
Of course. But
I just remember going, "This is my," like you're talking about with your, it's like, you're peeling off these masturbator signs. Like, this is like my first month on the job, and I'm like, this is where I'm going to continue working. This is a good place to work. This is all normal. Nothing's on fire. Yeah. And I never thought about it again until like years later, when I was like, what was that?
Yeah. Yes. It's so funny.
Yeah. And it was just some kid signed the lease, and then another kid cleaned it up.
Yep.
That's just how it was.
I used to think it was I had only been there maybe a month or two before Dove was like, "Go to New York and hire. Just go to New York and hire. Go tomorrow." And I'm like, what does that mean? Where do I stay? Just go to New York. And then once I got to New York, they were like, "Okay, go start location scouting. Here's a car. Just drive." And that. I used to think it was like a trial by fire, but really it was just because the company was growing so rapidly. They just needed bodies to do these positions, and I was sort of responsible, and here you go. And it felt good. It made me feel good. Of course, yeah. I interpret it as, I am the one who can do this.
Yes. But you don't go, "This is a bad way to run a company, and the reason I'm being hired to do it is because all the other people would never accept this job." You know what I mean? Like, yes. They'd be like, "I'm not going to work there. That company is circling the drain." Like, they would have seen what that meant.
Yeah. To me, it was so exciting. I'd spent a year working at the Urban Outfitters headquarters, and it was just, like dismal, beige colored corkboard, like boss in a button down. Everyone was significantly older than I was. I was working for the e-commerce department, which was sort of like the redheaded stepchild of the moment. Like, it was the catalog was important in the stores. And it was so boring and miserable. And I felt, we were selling T-shirts that said "Voting is for old people," and a board game called Getopoly. It was like, I knew, this is not me. This is not who I am. I have to get out of here. So then going to this other company, which seemed so revolutionary and was growing so rapidly and was the total opposite of that work environment, was so incredibly seductive to me. Well, so the unraveling, or how everything was so crazy, that just fired me up even more.
When it's hard when it's working to be like, this is not how it should be done. Because it's not like you had started your own, $100 million apparel company, and you're like, "There's a better way to do this." Yeah. You're just like, that way was horrible. Sort of corporate suit, bureaucracy. Then you go over here, you don't realize there's all these reasonable solutions between the two.
Yes.
The choice is not between like tyranny and anarchy. There's some there right in between that most successful companies are operating at. But you don't know that because you haven't worked there.
Yes, because you're 20.
Yeah, and it's also boring, so that's not talked about, right? Like the way most people operate does not enter the conversation because it's, by definition, unremarkable.
No, absolutely. Yeah, another thing people don't realize, how could you stay? It was a really fun job.
It's true.
It was an unbelievable amount of fun. The people that I met there are still some of my closest friends. And what I wanted to talk about with you is sort of the idea of regret. And sometimes at readings, people will say, if you had to do it all over again, would you do it? It's always like a Gen Z person. And I'm not really a regrets type of person. And I would totally have done it again.
Yeah.
You were in a little deeper, I think. I can, I don't know. I want to know what you thought about that.
No, regret is a hard word because I think we take that as meaning you sort of disavow that it happened and you're like that you, regret is almost, I think I'm reluctant to go, I regret it. I would do it differently in the sense that you're saying like, you don't like where you ended up. But I was talking to this woman, her name is Dr. Edie Eger. She's this Holocaust survivor. I was talking to her about something and she said, I was dealing with a different situation I had regret for. And she was like, I'll give you these magic words. And she's like, the magic words are, if I knew then what I knew now, I would do things differently, right? And so it's like, if I had awareness of certain things, I would have made different decisions. But I have the awareness I have now because of the decisions that I made and the things that I learned. I learned so much about human nature and people. It was, it's like going back in time and, like living at Versailles or something. You're like, oh, this is a fundamental part of the human psyche, like the way that, sort of hangers-on sort of circle around a powerful person and how cults of personality work.
Absolutely.
And, and so like that taught me so much. Then I have this kind of, it's more like I have some embarrassment about the fact that it took me so long to understand what it was and what it was happening. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. No, absolutely. You say something in one of your pieces like, you learned so much about yourself and how you respond to things. And it certainly was a character defining event for me.
Yes.
Talking to some of my friends who have relationships with Dove and still do to some extent, they're like, yeah, sometimes people will ask me, what'd you do before this? And I'll say American Apparel and they'll say, oh, and I just kind of keep my mouth shut. They're embarrassed.
Yes. Well, and then you see people who still haven't managed to swim free.
Oh,
and you
go,
oh, okay. So I have some regrets, but I feel good that I'm not that.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
You got to grade it on a curve of how other people handled it.
Yes, it's so true. Maybe not most, but a few of the girls that I write about in Striptease are still with him, still living with him.
It is remarkable. Like you get it. I thought you did it very well in the book. You're sort of talking about how you basically have this experience. You're like, I got to get out, and you go to get out, and then you sort of test the market, and you realize, oh, it's harder to get out than I thought, and it's not as good, and you come back. Mm-hmm. I think that's really important because when people get out of things or they walk away from careers, we tend to see it as this sort of epiphany moment where all became clear, you got moral clarity, and then you walk away. And it's not like that at all.
That's a very idealistic, like Hollywood way of looking at things that some people say. I agree.
Have you read The Harder They Fall?
No, I haven't.
It's this novel by Bud Schulberg. I thought I'd read you this passage. So I read this. My understanding was that I read this right before I left American Apparel, which was I left to write my first book in 2011, but they were basically like, what if we just kept paying you and you didn't actually leave? So I stayed for another 3 years. I left in 2014 after Dove was which I can get into. But
yeah.
So I left in 2014. So if you had said, when did you read the book that helped you realize why you shouldn't work there anymore? It must have been like around then, right? It should have been in 2014 or should have been in 2011 when you made the decision to leave. Because here's this passage. This is like the last page of the book. Let me see. He says, the worst of them all, the biggest heel of them all, the only one who knew right from wrong and kept his goddamn mouth shut, the only one who knew the score, knew what was going on, and still kept his hands in his pocket. And this is a publicist who's like starts working for a fighter that's propped up by the mob. And then he says, I knew the goddamn trouble with me. I thought, enough brains to see it and not enough guts to stand up to it. Thousands of us, millions of us, corrupted, rootless, career-ridden, good hearts and yellow bellies, living out our lives for the easy buck, the soft berth, indulging ourselves in the illusion that we can deal in filth without becoming the thing we touch. So I would have said, obviously, I read this, and then I left shortly thereafter. And so I was going to write about that a couple years ago. And so I was like, well, let me get the date. So I was like, I knew I bought it on Amazon. So I pulled up the Amazon release. I type in The Harder They Fall. And it goes, you bought this book in September of 2008.
Oh my God.
Like a year after I started. And that's when I read it too.
Yes.
So I read it. And so I would have thought all this stuff happened. And then I read the passage and the light goes on. I make all the connections. In fact, the exact opposite happens. I read it at the beginning. And then all the stuff happens.
Yeah.
So we have this sense that there's this moment where you get the clarity, and it's not that at all. And in fact, most people who become government witnesses or, walk away from cults or whatever it is, it's not only not glamorous, it's usually even kind of a shameful, like ran out with their tail between their legs. It's only later that we're like, oh, I get, and so that's actually given me a lot of empathy and sympathy now. Like, it just matters that you changed your mind. It just matters that you got out.
Yeah.
It just mattered that you stopped doing it. I'm not going to expect you to be perfect because I know it's really fucking hard to change your mind and to look back on past decisions you made and go, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah. Yes. The whole thing has made me so much more sensitive or aware of, people's bad behavior in the past, or I'm just not as judgmental. I'm not as judgmental as I was when I was 20, when I had everything figured out, when, I could spot, racism and sexism a mile away. It's just not that easy when the whole cultural canvas around you is obscuring everything. And when you need to make rent next month, people are like, I would have walked out of there. Like, I'm sure Becky on Goodreads, you would have right away. You would have been out of there. But who was going to pay your rent? Like, I wasn't going back to Philadelphia.
Yes.
I was not going to admit defeat. I was way too proud. And I stayed because I had to.
I remember even when I did leave, with American Apparel had very good health insurance. So then, when you leave a job, you do COBRA, right? And so all of a sudden you're paying, it was like $800 a month. And thankfully I did have something else. But I remember thinking, oh, this is why, if I was in a different place and had done things differently, I wouldn't have been able to leave.
Yep.
There's this idea in Upton Sinclair's writing. He first off, he has that great quote. It's very hard to get someone to understand something that their salary depends on them not understanding, right? Which is the essence of working at American Apparel or working for a certain political party or getting sucked into this or that. Like, you don't want to see it because your paycheck depends on you not seeing it. But he also has this idea, he calls it the dress suit bribe. And basically he's saying he's talking about some person who has to dress up in fancy clothes to work in finance or something. It's funny he's talking about this 100+ years ago, but he's like, you see yourself paying, he says, 5 cents to get your shoes shined. He says, but you don't see yourself as someone who is paid to be a person who has their shoes shined, right? And so, you don't think, one of the things I was always hesitant about, and I think it saved me, but other people were less careful, you don't realize all the different things that are happening along the way that are actually choices. They're actually you're actually getting bought and you don't realize it. And
definitely.
it's hard to get out from it.
Yes.
Right? You can't, you get a nicer apartment, right?
Yeah.
You buy an expensive engagement ring. You get in a fight with your parents about having the job, and now your identity, but also your lifestyle, is now at risk if you were to change your mind about what you're doing.
Yes, no, absolutely. There's in one of the reviews of Striptease, the writer quotes Margaret Atwood. It's amazing what someone can. I'm butchering this, but it's amazing what you can get used to, provided there are a few compensations. That is the story of American Apparel for me. My why I stayed.
There's if we're just quoting literature back and forth, there's a scene in The Great Gatsby where Gatsby goes to Nick and he says like, "Hey, I'm working on this thing. Maybe you could do me a favor, and I think there's a little bit of money in it for you." And Nick has a vague sense of what Gatsby does, and he doesn't kind of approve. And he says, like, I always reflected later in life that my entire future hinged on me politely declining that. Like that I didn't accept the offer was a direction shift in my life. Because what happens is people go, "Hey, can you do this?" We think of bribes as like, here's an envelope of cash, right? But instead, at American Apparel, it was like, "Hey, I'll co-sign a lease for you," right? Or, "Hey,
you need a car?"
Yes.
You need a reliable car,
right?
Yes, I do.
Yes, and so it's now you owe that person something, and the dynamic is very hard to shift. You talk about this. You have this experience that in any sane universe would have resulted in people being fired or lawsuits being filed, and instead the resolution is like, "Do you want a 1996 used Mercedes-Benz sedan?"
Yes.
From my fleet.
Yes. Do you want an apartment? You can pick it out. It has to be in Miami where you don't live and don't want to live.
Right.
But
it's I'm offering you a year lease on it. Like, it's not an asset that you get to keep. No. You know what I mean? It's not like, let me salve your conscience with an appreciating asset. It's like, let me actually indenture you more towards me for a set period of time.
Absolutely.
And so you don't. Like, I remember at one point he had some relationship with like a car dealer, and he would co-sign, and so we would sign these leases for people. And I remember like thinking, like, these people are signing it all away for like 3 years of IKEA, it wasn't, these weren't like Ferraris. No. These were, and so you end up, the compensations we all like to think like, my price is, in the millions of dollars, but your price is actually just like, "Oh yeah, I don't like flying in coach." And then they have you.
Yeah, that's so true.
And then because they have you, then you do things that you feel guilty about, or that you have attachments to.
Yeah.
And then you are complicit, so now you can't get out.
Oh, absolutely. Even down to, I remember he would say, "You want clothes? Take what you want. This stuff is pennies to me. It's nothing. Take what you want." At the time, it felt so special, and it does sort of it ingratiates you. You're in it. You're thankful.
Yeah, well, and so you have that, and then the other, I was struck by the scene you're talking about in the book where like you see someone in a photo shoot that you recruited, and so you now see those shoots a little differently than you did when you first started. And so I imagine there's kind of a guilt / I'm part of this feeling now.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, I hired hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. That was one situation where I really, I knew the girl, she was so young when I hired her, and here are these photos with the infamous white duvet, just about a year later.
Yeah.
And, but, I feel bad about that. But really, there's definitely some like Gen Zers who stand up at these readings, like, actually you're complicit and you brought all those, how many women, were, but I mean, really, that is just putting all the like at the time I was hiring for the biggest, people don't realize how big the company was.
Sure.
Everyone wanted to work there. Towards the end, I mean, I was hiring for mall stores.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people I hired their only contact with Dove would be, on a conference call.
Sure.
And I think that to say, you're to blame and you were part of this when I was so young and wrapped up in this systemic patriarchal capitalist system is just another of those sort of idealized Hollywood things, because really I was hiring for a huge store and the responsibility was on Dove's shoulders, not to date these high schoolers, not to abuse his employees. It's not about me hiring people to work, essentially it was like the Gap.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a blurrier line between victims and victimizers, and there's a hierarchy of them, right?
Yeah.
And I'm pointing out more, I think that you just feel yourself becoming part of this thing, and then it's easier for you to think the thing is okay than to think, oh, I'm part of the problem.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
And so it's a carrot and a kind of a stick thing, right? Where it's like you have all these benefits of doing it, and it's hard for you to see what's happening. And then in the moments where you start to feel guilty, you realize, oh, if I kind of tug at this thread, or if I look too hard in this mirror, I'm gonna have to feel some feelings that I don't want to feel. So it's easier just to keep going.
Oh, absolutely.
Or it's easier just to make certain, rules inside it that you feel okay with, instead of going, but the whole fucking thing is not okay. Like I told myself I was staying at a certain point, especially after I was like, I'm going to be a writer. I got this book deal. Why am I still here? I mean, there is, I heard someone once say that heroin and a salary are the two hardest, addictions to quit, to just go like, hey, I'd like to not be paid anymore is a hard thing to do at 25.
Absolutely.
But
you're isolated in a new city.
So I think, but what I told myself is, I can protect these people. Like, these are my people. I had this group that I had hired or had come into my department that I was the one, Dove talked to me and not to them, right? And if I went away, then how long would they last? Or what unpleasant experiences would they have? So you go, oh, I'm doing it for this. I'm one of the good guys inside the system or whatever.
Yep.
And you don't go, what kind of system has good guys? What kind of system needs good guys inside of a bad system? You don't think that. You just go, hey, I'm like, you go, I'm the person who's pulling papers off Trump's desk to keep us in NATO or whatever. And it's true, somebody does have to do. I heard this great line. It was, apparently they tell this to people in law school, they go, everyone is entitled to a lawyer, but it doesn't have to be you, right? So, but that's what you do. You go, if I don't do it, someone worse will do it, or I'm doing it and I'm doing it differently than these other people. And that's ultimately the lie that helps you rationalize what feels like not doing what feels like a very scary thing, that by the time you end up doing it, leaving or whatever, you're like, wait, this is what I was scared of? This is just regular life. Like, it's not that big a deal. But that's how, for sure. That's the dynamic that I think keeps people complicit.
Yes. Oh, definitely. When I left, I mean, I stayed for the company for 3 years. Striptease covers my first year, and you would think anyone would leave after that year. No, I stayed for 3 years. I was laid off at the start of the recession, and I cried. I was so sad. I couldn't imagine my life without American Apparel, without my friends. I was like totally lost.
Yeah, you cry for losing a job that you had tried to quit.
Oh yeah. After I just fell in deeper and deeper. I it was the devil I knew. I certainly didn't want to go back to working for a company like Urban Outfitters, which was corrupt in its own way. And I stayed. And then I went into reality television, a really great, But again, I had learned that lesson where I don't conflate my identity with what I do to pay the rent.
Yeah, you you think it's going to be so awful, and in fact, it's not. No. Like the people, I interviewed Adam Kinzinger, the Republican congressman who was on the January 6th commission. He was just talking about, he's like, my life is way better now. Yes. But he's like, there's something about not wanting to be an ex-congressman. He's like, actually, it's more lucrative. My conscience is clear. I have more time. I get to see my family. I can live where I want. But there's the status quo bias is such an enabling factor.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I felt such shame. Like all of my friends who were, most of them sleeping with Dove, they weren't going anywhere. Yeah. They were staying at least for the next, 5 to 10 years.
I mean, for me, it was like, I was worried about getting fired from a job I was trying to quit. Yeah. I wanted to be a writer. I moved, so basically I called Dove in, this would have been like March of 2011. And I said, look, I'm going to write this book. It's going to be about media. You're going to be partly in it. But this is what I'm here for. This is what this is what I wanted to do. And he's like, you got to talk to Tina. You probably knew Tina. He's like, you got to talk to Tina. She'll figure out the details with you. And Tina was like, nobody will care. Just we'll reduce your salary. You just keep writing. You go live where you want to live. Write your book, and we'll need you on some stuff. What ended up happening is I basically just negotiated a salary decrease, and I still had to do the same job. So I thought I was pulling something over on someone. In fact, I was getting, but
that's the Dove Charney way. I remember when he put me on salary at 30, he was like $30,000, a handshake. I was like, and then later I was like, wait a minute, $30,000 and I'm working overtime every day and I'm stuck here in Florida working with him. Shit. But it felt so great. You get $30,000.
Yeah. It's like, here's a way that I don't have to pay you overtime.
That's what it was. Before, totally. I was making way more before in overtime traveling. I was an hourly. I totally screwed myself. And there I was for the next 2 years on that salary.
But then things would happen, and I moments that I should have left, and I didn't, because I didn't want to get fired from the job that I literally had already quit in my head. It was all house money at that point. And still, you don't want to walk away from because it's just different. Quitting and getting fired are different.
Oh, absolutely.
And because you have a choice in one, even though rationally they're the exact same thing. And they're both getting you what you say you want, which is free and clear of this thing.
Yes. So interesting. Yep.
Or that's the other thing is when you find yourself, I talk about this in Courageous Calling, you find yourself being asked to do things that you shouldn't do or are not right. You go, well, if I say no, if I don't do it, I'll lose my job. And you're like, why do you want to keep a job where you can get fired for doing this thing that you're not supposed to do?
Yeah, just for doing what you think is right. No, absolutely.
Why is this an issue at all?
Those were dark days at the end. It's so crazy. You had to deal with all that.
It was not, he basically descended into insanity for a lot of the reasons that you predict in the book, which is he doesn't sleep.
No, the sleep deprivation is something you talk about that. That is really the crux of so much of it. And, my sister's a clinical psychologist. She diagnoses him.
With sort of hypomania?
Yes, exactly. A lot of CEOs have that. You're up all the time. It's called hyper. Oh, I can't believe I can't think of it right now.
Yeah, it's not ADD. It's almost like a bipolar kind of energy without the crashing. One side.
That's exactly, yes. Does he eat? I'm like, no, I really can't think of many situations where I've ever seen him eat. It's always the Nescafe. Does he sleep? No, I see him the next morning. He's wearing the same clothes. He's been talking on the phone to me all night. Of course he hasn't been sleeping.
Yeah, you don't realize you're not supposed to be getting calls from the CEO of a company.
Hyperthymic temperament.
Yes.
Does that sound right?
I think that's what you call it.
That's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I would get these calls at 3 or 4 in the morning, and we would talk, and it'd never be like, the store is on fire. It'd be like, I was thinking, what if we, it's like and I realized it was 2 things. One, it was a control. It was I'm always working. I expect you to always be working. This is one of my little tricks, is that every Christmas, Thanksgiving, whatever, I would call him in the morning. I would just call him for some nonsense.
Yeah.
And then he would think I was working, and then he would leave me alone.
Oh, that's so interesting.
But it was a control thing, and then it was something that only now that I'm older and I have my own life, I find to be quite sad, which is he literally had no one to talk to. It was a terribly sad life, and he was it could have been anyone that he was calling,
Yeah.
but he was just talking to someone until he fell asleep, because if he had silence, then the silence might lead to self-awareness.
Self-reflection, yeah.
And that was a
Absolutely.
deal breaker.
Yes, those late night calls. It seemed like mostly he would call men late at night. I'm not really sure why, but my other friends who managed stores, the manager of one of the Hollywood stores, he got those calls in the middle of the night too.
Really?
He was not really a high-level employee. He was just someone that Dove liked, and he would get those late night calls of nothing important, just business nonsense. It was very interesting.
Yeah, when I started my own company, I would sometimes call people. I'd be like, oh, I have this idea. It's 11:30. I'd call someone. And my wife was like, you can't do that. That's not normal.
Yeah.
That's abusive. I was like, oh, I guess. No. But I was like, but I've been getting calls, and it was like, oh, wait, this isn't what anyone signed up for.
Yeah.
And the people that will accept it are not the people that you want working with you.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
You know what I mean? Like, you want people who have options.
Yes. Oh,
and
absolutely.
people who have options don't want to be called at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Unless it's important.
Yeah. No one wants to be business all the time. And that is Dove Charney. I sold the option for this book, and they're writing the script now. The strike's over. And they were like, we need some warm, fuzzy Dove moments.
Yeah.
And I'm like, warm, fuzzy Dove moments? Like, when I look back over the 3 years, I can't remember any conversations that were not about work, except for one. There was one time that he talked to me about something social. We were in Miami. It's the climax of this book. It's rough, working like crazy. Just the two of us in the store. This store that was on Ocean Avenue, a store that is not built for retail.
Yeah.
It is just bars and restaurants. And he signed this 10-year lease on this incredibly expensive storefront that we were selling like 2 T-shirts and a towel a day.
Probably because he visited that street when he was a teenager, and it was implanted in his memory that that's somehow the American dream is to have a store on Ocean Avenue.
A block away from the Versace mansion, which literally was a block away. Right on the beach. And where was I going with this? Oh, yeah. So we were working. I was so exhausted. And he looks over at me and he says, do you watch The Sopranos? And I was like, oh my God, he watches television? Like,
yeah.
And then I was thinking, oh my gosh, does he relate to Tony? The bad guy with the heart of gold, he watches The Sopranos, huh? And so I'm sort of ready for him to, and I'm like, yeah, I watch The Sopranos. I think it might have been the last season. It might have been that year. This is 2006 maybe. Or it is in 2006, but I'm not sure where Sopranos were. But, so I'm like, whoa, is it about Tony? Like, what could he see? And he says, that Melfi man, she is hot. I'm like, oh, God. Yes, the psychiatrist is hot, which at the time, Melfi's, an older woman. She wasn't so hot to me, but now I see, like, yeah, Melfi is hot. Like, still, even in just talking about television, it was like back down to Melfi's hot. It wasn't anything deeper than that.
I had a moment. Did you? Since we're just quoting television shows now, did you watch Succession?
No, I didn't.
So there's a scene towards the end of Succession where the Rupert Murdoch character takes his bodyguard out to like some diner in New York City. His family's all alienated from him, and he just goes like, "You're my buddy, you're my pal, you're my best friend," and you're just like, "Oh, this is so sad."
Yes,
and I remember one time he had me over to the house to do something, and then it was like, he was like, "Do you want to go have dinner?" We went like antique shopping, and then we had like dinner, and it was just like, I realized he didn't have anyone to do these things with, and that the cost of all of the success was that he was this machine that couldn't be turned off.
Yes.
And what seemed like this immensely rich and envious life was probably a prison in some ways. And it was a prison built on what also must have been a profoundly sad and awful childhood. Did he ever have you watch The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz? Did you ever hear him talk about this? So it's a novel, which he, of course, did not read. But the novel was made into a movie with Richard Dreyfuss. And it's he's this sort of Jewish hustler kid, like a street kid who's ambitious, who's like got this knack for sales and trading things up. And it's based in Montreal, like all the places that Dove would have went as a kid, like all his favorite restaurants. And so I remember one time he had me had me pirate the movie to put it on the intranet, like the company server.
Yes, of course.
So he could, whenever he would hire some kid, he'd be like, go to this link and watch,
read 48 Laws of Power, watch this movie.
Yeah, it was that movie. And so at one point I was like, I'm going to go I watched the movie. I stomped around all the places in Montreal on one of those, things where the whole center of the company has to go to this place. But I was like, I'm going to actually read the book. And so I read the book, and the premise of the book is basically it's this hustler kid who has the love of this young, like his girlfriend. And then he has a father and a grandfather. And the grandfather's the person he admires more than anything in the world. And the grandfather basically says something like, you're not a man if you don't own land.
Yeah.
And like that basically it was this sort of Jewish experience that you had to like make your stake in the world, get successful, and then no one could fuck with you. And then you were not a nobody. Yeah. You made it. And so he's this hustler, he's trying to do this, and he ends up, long story short, basically betraying all his values to get this piece of land.
Yes.
That when he brings his grandfather to see, his grandfather's like disowns him because he knows what he did, that the kid misses it. And so I always got this sense that Dove had this sense that if he could just become successful enough, do enough, be popular enough, somebody that rejected him early would love him, whether it was his parents or probably more realistically, whoever the quintessential American Apparel girl was, that was the girl that stood him up for prom or whatever, right? Or humiliated him in some way. Yeah. There was some like urge to, if he just did this stuff, then he would not feel bad, that the stress and pain would go away.
Yes.
And one of the most painful lessons you learn in life is that you cannot fix internal pain with external accomplishments or accumulation. So he gets there, he gets to the literally like one of the highest mansions in Los Angeles. Like you're looking down on the rest of Los Angeles and you're a fashion icon. You have more than of anything you could possibly want, and you're just sad and lonely.
Yes. Which is why with Los Angeles Apparel, of course he thinks he'll do that again.
Yeah.
He has to do it again. He can't do anything else. He
has to roll the ball up the hill, even if it rolls all the way back down. The ball
is kind of rolling up the hill. Like some young person was like, oh, I didn't know that Los Angeles Apparel used to be American Apparel. I had no idea. They only know Los Angeles Apparel.
Right.
Like it's...
But and it's interesting. It's like his aesthetic is so singular and unique that it almost can't be based on any kind of like rational, like I think this looks good. It's something like psychosexual that's like implanted in his brain.
It's a compensation.
Yeah.
This is the image he wants to portray. And why is that?
This is the world he wants to live in. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Where people dress this way and things look this way. It's like it helped me understand certain artists that it's like, oh, it's not just like, oh, you like painting this. It's like, this is something that's like inserted between you and the world. And that's how you fundamentally see the world. And you can't not see it any other way.
Yeah. That's why he's so unmanageable. That's why the company just totally imploded.
Yeah.
Because you cannot change Dov Charney. You can't convince him. You can't use logic. He is who he is and still is.
And it's, again, we think these things are about money or power, and it's so clearly something way deeper than that, because he had like hundreds of millions of dollars of reasons to not do this.
It's so
and he
true.
can't not do it.
Yeah.
So I was involved when the board decided to fire him. And I found out later, I'd sort of written out this email, like the board was so disconnected. And so they were sort of like, because he wanted it that way. It was a hand-picked board of people who liked him and stuff. And so they're kind of like, we don't know what's happening. Can you like give it? And I wrote this thing, and I eventually found out that this email had made its way back towards Dov because it came up in one of the lawsuits. But I sort of wrote down this email of all this problems. And so when they fired him, they basically went to him and they said, look, you've got...
This is the meeting where he's bringing the shoes in to show off these new shoes.
I think so.
Yeah.
And he's like, He thinks, even though the share price is 70 cents, banks won't lend to him, sales are cratering, he's been sued a gazillion times, he's firing all the people left in the company, and he's just spent months living in this shipping facility in La Mirada. And he thinks it's going to be rubber stamp as usual, and instead they're basically like, look, this is going to go one of two ways. You can resign as CEO, keep all your shares, which are currently worth tens of millions, but if we turn it around, you'll be a billionaire, and we'll give you $1 million a year consulting contract, and we won't tell anyone why this happened, right? Or this is the press release we're going to send out, and you're going to be terminated for cause. You'll lose everything.
Yes.
He's like, eating Nescafe raw in cold water or whatever, just addicted to caffeine and energy. And he's like, I need to think about it for a second. He walks out of the room, and then he comes back and he goes, I reject both options, and proceeds to try this hostile takeover, which, he must have known was not going to be successful.
Yeah, this is the Standard General
This
stuff.
is the Standard General, which is not going to be successful. And I mean, he goes to them and he says, I have been wrongfully terminated from my company. I have done nothing wrong. And they said, really, you've done nothing wrong? He said, I've never harmed a fly. I've never harassed an employee. I've never, and they were like, okay, we'll put up all your shares as collateral. And if you are vindicated by an investigation, we'll give you the company, whatever. And if not, you're going to lose everything. And he's like, I want that. And he must have known. Like, I knew he wouldn't pass this investigation, and I was only one of dozens of people that they interviewed. And so there was some part of him that basically said, like, this. You talked about you identifying. He said, I would rather it not exist than me not have it, because it is me.
Yeah.
And so he effectively destroyed the company.
Torched the whole thing for everyone.
And he did it all from a booth at Farmer Boys across the street.
Oh, that Farmer Boys.
Because he was banned from the premise. And so he set up shop in that Farmer Boys.
Oh my God, I did not know that detail.
And he would just watch who came and went. And the employees that were still loyal would go over there for lunch. And they basically just plotted destroying the thing that there's no rational way not to have known that how it would go any other way, but then it was beyond rational at that point.
That doesn't matter. I mean, I'm sure, I think he did think he could do it and pull it off. He's pulled off everything else.
Yes. You realize what the superpower is the ability to so convince yourself of something that you're able to convince other people. I mean, changed.
That's his story.
Well, it changed how I watched representatives from George Soros's company come in, and he convinced them to give him a ton of money. And then Ron Burkle, like sharks, and he convinced them, like, I'm not crazy. Everyone else is crazy. I can be reformed. His thing was that he could convince other people that white was black and black was white, and that he could bend reality to his will.
Yes. Yeah. So when people are like, why didn't you just leave? Like, do you know what we were up against?
Well, and for him, why didn't he walk? He couldn't.
Yeah.
He couldn't.
Oh, no, could not. No. That's why he's still doing it.
Yeah.
With the same people. Some of the same people.
A lesson I took out of it, too, was, okay, so the whole idea is fucking nuts, right? Like, we're going to make clothes in America. We're going to pay people a fair wage. We're going to do it in an old building in Los Angeles. We're going to own our own stores. We're going to do our own marketing. Every part of that
is going to be done in this one little building.
Each one of those is probably a bad business decision. Cumulatively, it's deranged. It flies in the face of all conventional understanding of the apparel and fashion business in the 2000s, right? And it worked. Yes. He did it. And it not just worked, but he was paying, people whose other choice was to work in a sweatshop. They were suddenly making a family, two were making 80, 100 grand a year with benefits, in great working conditions. He did it.
Yep.
So the problem, I think, for entrepreneurs, artists, people, leaders is like everyone tells you that it can't work and that you're a madman for considering it. And then you do it. How do you then go, I should probably hire a competent CPA or because we need a director of finance, we need a whatever, because the board says it's a good idea. You're like, fuck the board, fuck what the Wall Street Journal says, fuck what the lawyers say we have to do. They told me none of this would work in the first place. And that in that success, you are sowing the seeds of your own destruction.
It's so true. It's so true. It's the I alone can fix.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You're like everyone who offers me advice or feedback or warnings is a hater plotting my destruction, when in fact they're like, people have driven off this cliff a lot of times and we're trying to help you.
Yes, we're showing you some red flags here.
Yeah, when we say you should sleep or not, we should sleep like in your bed, and you should, by the way, not sleep with your employees. This is not like our personal moralizing judgment. This is like, these are the sirens that, destroy the ships in these waters.
Exactly. And, his reaction when people would say, you shouldn't sleep with your employees. The heart wants what it wants. He'd sort of say with like a half smile on his face. Like, that's your ruin, the heart, the ego, whatever that is.
Yeah, a friend of mine interviewed Dove on a podcast. I think it's maybe the last one he did. And he was like, Dove, I want to like describe to you this hypothetical. He was like, you're running American Apparel and I'm Wall Street or I'm the board, and I say, you can't eat peanuts. You just can't eat any more peanuts. And if you eat any more peanuts, like you lose everything. Why can't you just not eat peanuts? And Dove just goes, I should be able to sleep with who I want. Like he can't. It was so triggering. Like he couldn't even continue the conceit of the metaphor.
No, the allegory.
For him.
Yeah, just straight up libertarianism.
Right. Well, it's a lack of discipline and ethics and empathy.
Well, of course,
and all of these things that ultimately, like running a company that you do all these already crazy things in economically can't also have this other liability on top of it. Yeah. But ultimately, you probably realize the company was always a means to an end to do the other thing. So it's not like he didn't want to run the company. He wanted what he thought the company would give him, which is the thing. So to say, hey, it's like the person wants to be president because they want the power, not because they have the policy. So you're like, hey, your thing is engendering the policy. They're like, fuck your policy ideas. Like, all I want is to be the guy at that desk.
Yes, for sure. Yes, that's American Apparel. Oof. That's such an interesting way to think about it.
Which way?
What you just said.
Oh. It's and then who are we?
I do think that he has a genuine concern for those factory employees. I mean, he was crying about it when all that was going down.
Yeah, it's like
he sacrificed all that though.
Yeah, I talk about this in the book I'm writing now. He had this North Star, and then because I remember one time, speaking of a human moment, I remember one time we were talking and someone was saying something like, if you do this, you'll make more money. Like if we move this here, we do this here. And he said, like, if all I cared about was making money, I'd have become a drug dealer. And that stuck with me. And I was like, oh yeah, we make these we make these decisions, we pick these paths in life where we're saying money is not my main thing. Yeah. And then all we think about is money, right? Which it's like, you already said this is more important. And so that was great. He was like, oh yeah, this is a business and it is a capitalist business and it's designed to make a profit. It doesn't work if it doesn't make a profit. But his point was, profit's not the main thing, or even it's not the only thing or even the main thing. But the problem is that sort of North Star of like, hey, what I'm actually trying to do is, make a great company, not fuck anyone over in the process, blah, blah, blah. This gets another North Star, maybe lower down on the body, becomes his priority. And now he's making some other thing is leading him in these different decisions. And when he was making the decisions based on the North Star, he was doing heroic, wonderful, amazing things. And then when he was driven by something maybe more primal or sexual, it made horrible decisions that had horrible consequences for him and for other people.
Yeah, definitely. But those two things were always there right from the beginning. I mean, that Jane Mag article, he was devastated when it came out. I just heard through the grapevine, but he got so much press from it, you know?
How
He
could that
started
have not
building
been the
his
end of
like
it?
perv brand. I know, how could that not have been the end of it? But
Or even to, and I'm sure you heard his explanation for what was happening, but who would endanger everything that they had to do that? And you realize, oh, this isn't a person. This is a series of compulsions inside of a skin suit. You know, like that's not like that's not what. A regular person wouldn't do that. And maybe the argument is like they were separate, or these things were intertwined. You know, you have your there's like this civil war. You have your North and your South, right? And sometimes you're motivated by one, sometimes the other, but the good part's winning out most of the time.
Yes.
Or you wouldn't have gotten as far as you were. The problem for him is then he's not sleeping, he's not taking care of himself, he has no hobbies, he has no family, he has nothing balancing him out. And the ability to regulate, to know, hey, this is a trivial give to the lower urge, or I'm going all in on this thing. You lose the ability to regulate and to make decisions and to evaluate risks, and you end up inevitably imperiling all of it because.
Yes, I know, that's the saddest part.
Yeah.
Like, I come from a little town in Pennsylvania. It's just like a hillbilly hamlet.
Yeah.
But, you know, there were factories there. There were clothing factories. There was a vinyl factory. There were all factories.
Yeah.
And then it was a coal town. And then when that fizzled out, then there were these factories at least providing jobs and dignity to the people that live in this valley. Yeah. And then because of Democrats, because of NAFTA, you know, all of those jobs were sent away. And now it is just an opioid pit.
Yeah.
And when I saw what was happening with American Apparel, which was just the effects of all those jobs leaving when I was in high school were just sort of starting to show. And that's actually what my second book's about. I'm really excited about it. And I saw, like, look how he's doing this. Yes. We could do this everywhere. We could bring those jobs back. And I mean, it's more important now than ever.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like everyone I knew or everyone my generation was celebrating was all like internet entrepreneurs, making like social networks and apps. And I was like, this is real. This is stuff you can touch. Yes. This is a building. They're not going, hey, you know, Instagram just sold for $1 billion. We have 8 employees. Yep. This was like, we're celebrating the fact that 12,000 people work here, you know, and that is all true and real and good.
Yeah, and they're cheering when he walks by.
Yeah,
I mean, you just need to see that once.
And so that's what made the tragedy of all of it.
Oh my gosh, awful.
And then towards the end, that there was no part of him, you know, it's like, look, for all of Nixon's flaws, he basically resigns so as to not throw the country into a constitutional crisis. He respects, as much as he wants the office for himself, he so lionizes the office and the idea of the office that he leaves before it's destroyed.
Yes.
And Dove had this moment, right, to go, the jig is up, I'm still rich, I'm still, you know, I still got these groupies around. I'm going to walk away, and I'm not going to throw 8,000 sewers onto the streets.
Yes.
But he can't do it. Yeah. And that is what Duddy Kravitz is. Like, he has this idea that he wants this land, and the land is everything. And even when basically by cutting corners, his friend gets paralyzed, and he could have spent he trades everything to get this thing.
Yeah.
And the grandfather's not wrong. He goes, I see what you become to get this.
Yes.
And that's the tragedy. It's like the tragedy of American Apparel is that the guy first says he cares about his workers, but he only cares about the blue collar workers, doesn't mind exploiting and abusing, the woman making $30,000 a year or the college intern or whatever.
Yep.
And then when push really comes to shove and he has to choose between himself and all of those people, he chooses himself.
Yes. Yes.
I said that to him towards the end.
You said that to him?
Yeah, I said something like,
you're in like such a unique position of being able to say things like that to him. Like that, I could never. It wouldn't have. I've never seen anyone stand up to him or.
I said something like, I was like, I agreed that you should have been fired, but even if I hadn't, who you were and what you did after made you worthy of that happening to you. And
what did he say?
Of course, nothing, you know, just, you know, a wall of victimology and, you know, anger and resentment and all this stuff. You couldn't see it. But because of course he never did anything wrong. He was totally innocent and he's always being persecuted.
Yes.
Which I should have seen from the beginning.
Of course.
But that's how it's like, even if he had been innocent, an innocent person wouldn't have taken it all with them.
Yes. Yes. That's so true. Yeah.
Just like a person, I think in your book, it's like, it must have been a moment for you when you saw all this stuff happening around you. And, you know, maybe it's wrong, maybe it's right, and then something happened to you that wasn't him. Like an employee who we should talk about.
Yeah.
An employee, I think I could guess through the pseudonyms. But somebody basically jumps on you and
Kavanaugh's me. I think it's like sort of the best description of that event.
Oh, that's horrible. But his instinct wasn't to protect you. When Dove finds out about it, his instinct is, how do I make this go away so it doesn't inconvenience me?
Yes.
And fundamentally, what happened to you is not any less awful than a person paying some refugee or migrant worker 8 cents an hour to sew clothes. It's exploitation and it's abuse and it's wrong. And he had just decided that some things he cared about and some things he didn't.
It's so true. Yes. And turned it into his sort of like political ideology.
Yes.
You know, you're stronger than this. Don't be a victim. Be an example to the other girls. You just let this roll off your shoulder. And he called everybody into the back room and lined them all up, not the offender. Yeah. But, you know, the girls who wouldn't let me stay in the company apartment, so I had to stay in the boys' apartment. And he just went down the line and just screamed at them. And I remember them being so ashamed, and it made me feel so good. Like that, you know?
Right.
He was like, you know, that guy's going to salute you. You know, what's wrong with you? Sort of dressing down their work ethic. And it felt good. Like I wanted to hear that. It felt like he cared about me. But I mean, looking back at the scheme of things, you know, that was my compensation.
Yeah.
That was all I got.
Right. Yeah. And so
for a while it wasn't enough, but it worked. You know, I was like, yeah, it felt good.
Yes.
Even though I was being so horrifically, mistreated.
Yeah. Yeah. He hadn't done anything wrong.
Yeah.
Right. So that his impulse was to protect the other person, right, gives you a sense of his own understanding of all of it. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, definitely. I mean, he had to have empathized with this abuser. He let him keep his job.
If we start drawing lines that you can't jump all over one of the women that work for the company, who among us has not, that's what he's basically saying.
Exactly. So how on earth could he get this guy fired? That's all I wanted. I wanted him fired. He wasn't fit to be traveling. He shouldn't have been staying in apartments. He had substance abuse problems. He shouldn't be traveling with the girls.
Yeah.
All I wanted was for him to be fired. And he stayed. We worked together. I mean, not really, but I'd walk I'd do interviews in stores and he'd be there working.
I always got this sense that he had been horribly bullied and abused as a kid, like at school, not by parents. Yeah. And the result of what this was, he had gotten this sort of real sympathy / like identification with people who were being accused or criticized or whatever. Because I remember he was always, someone would do something horrible or screw up and people in the company would be mad at that person. And his instinct was always to defend and protect that person.
Gosh, absolutely. I was in Boston and I uncovered this scheme. I almost wrote about it in the book where the manager had like her family on the payroll, her boyfriend. They didn't work there. Yeah. But she was just just embezzling all of this money from the company. And I discover it when I'm there. I like write this like email. It's like 3 pages long. I'm like, this is going on and this is going on. Like, here I am. I'm seeing it with my own eyes and looking at the paperwork. And I got a call back from one of his gals. And she was like, that was a really long email. I'm like, yeah, but did you see what I uncovered? Sure. And she said, Dove says that she's a really nice girl.
Yeah.
And that was it. She kept her job. I went on to the next city. Who knows what happened after I left, but Dove says she's a nice girl.
Yeah, I remember we were doing these warehouse sales because he would make all this inventory that was obviously not going to sell.
Yeah, I love those sales. That factory store.
Yes. It's best. But so much of it, in retrospect, was obviously just bad managerial decisions. Yeah, that's why we had this stuff. And then because he was so attached to it, he could never just get rid of it, right? Yeah. And so we would sell in these warehouse sales. And I remember I was doing all the marketing for them. We had these successful ones in the US, so we were going to take it on the road. We're doing one in London and one in Paris, maybe. And so this is right when Facebook started blowing up. So the marketing just takes off at this level that we don't anticipate. So I don't know, we expected like 1,000 people to come to the sale. Like 20,000 people RSVP'd to the Facebook event. Mm-hmm. So it's taken off on this level that, right? Yeah. And so I'm like talking to the people who are doing the thing. And one of his sort of, there's the Dove girls, but there are also Dove boys. There were like guys who you couldn't figure out what their role in the universe was. And one of them was in charge of it. And I remember going, 20,000 people or more are going to show up this thing. You have to be prepared for that. There's going to need to be security. And we went over it like multiple times. Mm-hmm. And it just sort of, just flying by the seat of your pants. And so what happens is 20,000 people show up. The store it's not ready to open, and a riot breaks out. And like 20 police officers were injured in this riot. There's videos of it, like people jumping on police cars. Crazy. So this is all obviously happening in the middle of the night, but I'm sort of watching it happen. And, I call Dove, it's like 4 a.m. And I go, Dove. And he's the first, he obviously had already heard about it. And the first words out of his mouth were, it's not Insert's fault. Like, not like, what are we going to do? How are we going to help these people? I can't believe it. Yes. Blah, blah, blah. It's not this person's fault. And it obviously wasn't a sexual thing because he's a dude. Yeah. And
like, what's the important issue here?
The important issue is not holding a person accountable. Yes. That was the thing. And so there was, I think, again, because if we start holding people accountable for stuff, then the whole thing falls apart.
That's so true. Yeah. You can see it again and again.
Yeah. And so you're like, this isn't a business. This is like somebody's Freudian, like whatever, just playing out,
Yes.
And then I just kept working.
Yeah. And then you just stay.
That's the weirdest. Like, how did I think it was going to go? Where did I think it was going to go?
Yeah.
And then I remember at the end, like, part of me going like, but now I'm not going to be able to say that I worked. Like I remember thinking like this time would be good because the company was obviously going to go on, and it would be like, oh, I worked at Apple in the early days.
Yeah, in the early days, yeah.
But how did I not? I guess I just didn't have the ability to go, this is obviously crashing and burning at some point.
Yeah.
Like you're trading. Yeah. You're trading your values for an item on your resume. Putting aside that you don't want a resume, you want to work for yourself, but you're for this line item on your resume as if it's not inevitably going to blow itself up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you find when you left, when you tried to work, people were like, they actually saw it as like not an asset, but a liability?
Oh, it was totally. Yeah, I talk about it in striptease. I was like, I'm going to get a new job. Yeah. I'm going to, who's not going to want me? I did all the hiring for the biggest company, American Apparel. Who's not going to want me? No one wanted me. They were like, because they knew I had a bad reputation just by default. They wanted to talk. I applied to Betsy Johnson. They wanted to talk about Dove Charney. Yeah. What was it like there? To them, I was just sort of like a curiosity. I was an oddity. I was a young person with no other job experience. And I'm sure they just all assumed I was one of his girlfriends.
I've had this weird experience. There was Dove and there's another one where basically like when I was young, this sort of successful older man saw potential in me and gave me a position or access that I almost certainly didn't deserve. And I thought it was very exciting and interesting, and I learned a lot, and obviously it set me up to be successful. But as I've left, I've wrestled with this idea of like, were they wrong or were they right? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's obviously this corrupt, fucked up system that's just like picking people that it thinks can be kind of willing soldiers in this thing. But then also, you did a great job. Do you know what I mean? Like they were getting a great bargain on you. They were paying you a little, and you were actually super competent. But I think I've struggled with this idea of like, did they actually see something in me, or was it like the broken system is right occasionally? You know, or did they see that I was talented, but I also had this other thing that they could take advantage of? Like I've really struggled. Of all the things I should be, you know, sorting through, like, what does this say about me is probably not the main thing I should be thinking about post-American Apparel, but that is one of the big ones. Like, what did it say about me?
Yeah, I mean, it's so character defining. But I just give myself a little bit of compassion and grace. I was so young, wrapped up in this. And, you know, maybe I will have some breakdown in 10 years and be like, I fed all those girls to him. And, I do think about that. But I don't know. I let myself off the hook a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I was one of them. I was, sucked into that system like just so easily.
Yeah. I went back and I asked like some of the women that worked for me there. I was like, was I feeding you to this thing? Like, did you feel like, and I like, because this is when I was writing the afterword to Courageous Calling, and I was really worried about, like, there's a reason I hadn't asked the question before, you know, like, was I part of the problem, right?
Of course.
Because I read about Harvey Weinstein, these other sort of Me Too people, and I was really struck by the role of the the secretaries or the talent agents that were sending these people to these auditions or buzzing them up, right? And I two of them that worked for me, they were like, look, I don't know about everything else, but they were like, we came from Canada to come work at American Apparel, and Dove had seen us on a trip, and he brought us down, and he assigned us to work for you. And they were like, we remember you didn't want us to work for you because you just thought, you know, who are these people? And then he had us staying at the house, and they said they were like, what we remember is we came into your office first day. And
did you work at the factory?
Yeah, I had an office on the factory on the second floor, right next to Roz's office, as you call him. I was down the way a little bit. But they were like, the first thing you said to us was, you got to get the fuck out of Dove's house. And they were like, we're so grateful. And I had no recollection of that.
Wow, that's
right?
so interesting. Yeah.
That I was like, okay, there's two paths here. You got to get off this path.
Yes.
And so I felt good about that.
Yeah. And then they?
Yes, they did. And they worked for me for 4 or 5 years. And they were part of the reason that I didn't leave is that like, I knew that I could go, you got to give this person a raise. Or like I was the intermediary between them. Because there wasn't a lot of hierarchy, right?
No, not at all.
And there was at least some respected hierarchy there, which meant more that I could act as a buffer, not even just from Dove, but the other crazy, awful people.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And so I felt good about that, but then it's I don't know. I still wrestle with by not speaking up. How complicit are you? And then also, though, the reason I was able to work on his removal ultimately is that I was still there. So it's this inherently problematic position of being the adult in the room. Is the adult in the room a positive influence or actually a stamp of approval?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you weren't there doing that gig, who else could be doing it? You know, when I did my hiring after this experience, you know, well, really, I wouldn't hire high schoolers.
Sure.
In the beginning, I did. I didn't know what I was doing. But then just because, you know, I wanted full-timers. I wanted people who wanted the health insurance. You know, I went out and hired, you know, people in their mid-20s, people that, you know, had been working at Urban Outfitters, and now they could have their own store.
Sure.
And like, there was a lot of good in that. These girls learned how to create businesses and sell businesses. And what other jobs would be giving people someone like me an opportunity like that. You know,
Yes.
I learned so much about how businesses run, and so did all the other girls. In fact, my editor was like, that's how we should have ended this book. Just a list of where everybody is now, like to really fuck with people. I don't like this ending. You know, people want like a didactic wrap up.
Yeah.
They want me to say like, sexism is bad and I was bad. But that's like just too easy of an ending for this story. You know, why do these stories keep happening? You know, at the end of my book, I have like a sort of dark joke where I'm going into TV to work for a man called Les Moonves. And isn't he going to be great?
Yeah, because he's a good family man and has a good reputation. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, these stories, it's not just the American Apparel story. Dove is not just this, you know, isolated offender.
Sure.
And, you know, it's not all bad. A lot of good things came from this company. It taught us a lot of things. It taught me a lot about myself. And yeah.
Do you see, did a bunch of people that you hired go on to do things?
Not people that I hired, because, you know, I sort of lose touch with them. I, you know, hire a staff and leave. But the women that worked with me, yes. Sure. Yeah. A lot of the women in the book.
I think
even Roz. I mean, look at Roz. Like they go on to create their own apparel companies that are wildly successful.
Yeah. I don't know.
I wouldn't have had the guts. I wouldn't have known I could do it.
I had a different read on American Apparel. I thought it was remarkable that a company that was so big and so influential actually didn't seed like a bunch of other big companies.
Yeah.
Like funny enough, one of the store designers is the co-founder of WeWork.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Store designer for
the New York stores. He was one of the like architect, like build out guys.
Yeah.
Miguel something, I think is his name.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's a couple other ones, but not, you would think that when something falls, that talent would go elsewhere.
Yeah.
I've always wondered how much of it in retrospect was talent if it didn't go on to do other things.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking more, I mean, maybe they're not huge companies, but one of the girls I write about in the book, you know, she went on to just become an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
She had a little business selling like the rubber bands that go on braces. And she was like, I would go to these like orthodontic fairs and I would merchandise them just like American Apparel. I had every color. And she was like, I made so much money and it was all under the table that I had to stop doing it. So then she took the money she earned there and she bought a huge piece of land, which she's going to turn into a subdivision. Like, she would never, this is someone who doesn't have a college education. Yeah, like she learned everything in American Apparel. You know, look what she's done. It's so amazing. She's so angry at me, but I really respect her as an entrepreneur.
Because of how she came off in the book, she's angry?
No. Because of Dove's reaction to the book. She actually loved the book at first. She posted it on her story. Hey, everybody, I'm in this book. And then the next day she went to Dove's factory. And then the next morning I got a text being like, my feelings have changed. I feel exploited. I can't believe you didn't tell me you were going to tell my stories. So that's the power of Dove, even now.
Well, I want to ask about that in a second. But yeah, I feel like I learned a bunch of lessons like that. Even, one from your book, I like the thing where he was like, you're at some store and he's like, see this tile?
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, do you know what the rent is on this tile? Mm-hmm. And he says, for people who haven't read it yet, he goes, look at this tile. What do you think the rent on this piece of tile is? Basically saying like, I have to sell 2 t-shirts a day to pay for this tile. And he's like, look how many fucking pieces of tile are in this store. Now, one argument is you're the one that put in this expensive tile and you know, you didn't think any of that through, Dove. But the other is, you have to think about the cost of just break even cost. I remember one time we just opened a new store, just started some different channel and, you know, he said something and he goes, he said something and I go, like the sales are like, you know, $1,000 or whatever. He goes, Ryan, he's like, run rates always start at 0. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I realized that he was a person who had started at 0 and built that to $700-800 million a year in sales. Like he saw that with each store. It starts with the first day has $0 in sales, and the next day it's 100 and 200. And so he had this ability to kind of extrapolate, whereas he had this confidence in himself because he knew where stuff ended up, right?
Yes.
And that run rates always start at 0. Something I think about all the time whenever I'm starting something new.
Yes.
Like I'm launching a book. I go, the first week, starting at 0. But what matters is where it ends up. It doesn't matter how it's doing right now.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't even matter what the run rate says. It matters where it ends up.
Yeah. That's responsible for putting those blinders on him. You only experience success.
I had another one where he, I called him to like tell him something good I'd done. And like, we just did this. And he goes, Brian, never call me to tell me you did your fucking job.
Oh my God, totally.
And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. This is literally what I'm supposed to be doing. Why am I, you're not my dad. Why am I trying to get some pat on the back from you?
Yeah. Yeah, but God, I lived for those pats on the back.
Of course. Of course. That's the whole system.
Yeah.
So what was his reaction to the book? Or have you heard?
I haven't heard. Well, I mean, he doesn't read books, so there's no way he read this book.
Yeah.
So I think my friend went there and gave him the lowdown, and he got angry.
Yes.
Not that there's anything in this book that hasn't really been said or done in front of a journalist. There are a few scoops in there that I'm sure he wasn't too psyched on. And I've been waiting in the reviews or pieces on the book for that, we reached out to Dov Charney for comment. And it finally happened in a Washington Post piece. And it said, we reached out for comment and, he didn't comment.
Yeah.
And then recently I had a reading where there was a young woman who works for him who came. And she, at the end, I think she's even still living in the big house.
Yeesh.
I know, with all that stuff happening.
Yeah,
and
not for much longer, it sounds like.
Yeah, I know. Oh, God, it's so fascinating. It's so strange, that story. She, I asked her, what does he think? And she was sort of like, I knew there was an opinion, but she wouldn't give it to me.
Yeah.
But she said, I talk a lot about the sort of the complicated nature of Dov when I do these Q&As. And, it's hard to just totally disavow my experience there and be critical of him and him as a businessman and stuff like that. And she, of course, loved that.
Yeah.
I think people want me to be like, he's bad, he's an awful, he's a predator. There's just such a difference between predators like Weinstein and predators like Charney. And then the next day she wrote to me and was like, I just want to tell you again how much I liked how you handled yourself in that Q&A.
Interesting.
So I really don't know how he feels about it.
Do you think he sent that person?
Yeah.
So that doesn't read to you as like intimidation?
It didn't intimidate me.
But I mean, do you like one if you're not
I shouldn't think about that.
Like I'm trying to think about how a person who, this is a Scientology story or a different thing, you'd be like, oh, they sent representatives in the audience to send a message.
Yes. Well, there could be other representatives that he could send that would intimidate me.
Sure.
People that are in this story who are still with him. And that was always sort of my fear. Like, what if they show up? What if they're yelling?
Yeah.
My lawyer's like, you want that to happen. It's good for the book. Bring them on, But yeah, I that's so interesting. It could be an intimidation tactic. Yeah, he's just sort of, I don't know, keeping his hands on the pulse. But I don't know. I'd love to know what he thinks about it, but I have no idea.
Yeah, I've never heard from him about anything that I've written. I always thought it'd be fascinating for there to be a documentary about it, but
well, do you know about this Netflix documentary?
No.
It's greenlit.
Oh.
Yeah, I thought for sure they would be talking to you about it.
Well, so at a certain point, I just decided I don't owe anyone interviews about my experience at American Apparel.
Yeah.
Because like I did one, it was he was on that podcast Startup.
Oh yeah. That's a good one.
And I did like 5 hours of interviews for it. And it was interesting, it was cathartic. It was actually a great episode. And they really got some stuff, like they got him like losing his mind.
Ranting and raving. Yeah, that was a good one. That might be the one where the girl and her partner are fighting. That was a good representation of.
Although there were some people in there that I was like, you're a nobody. You did not do anything.
Yeah.
But all this, I basically was like, I have to move on and live my life. I don't owe anyone like a part-time job, a part-time job, as a spokesperson for ex-employees. And so I just basically decided I turned down all of them. I don't do them.
Yeah.
And it's been sort of healing and also good. Like cleared up time.
Yeah.
And then every once in a while there's one I go, oh, maybe I should have done that one. But it's just because I'm glad we're doing this, but every time I see someone from American Apparel, I'm like, I could spend like 8 hours because there's just so much to process.
So much. Yes, so much to process.
Yeah, and you realize you're just carrying it around. And anyways, that's kind of my thing. But I'd be fascinated. I think there should be a really good documentary about it.
Yeah, I think this might be good. It's by this production company, Raw. They did like The Tinder Swindler and Don't Fuck with Cats. I mean, if I didn't have this book, I would never want to do something like that. I'm like a very private person.
Sure.
You know, I just put out this memoir, spilling my guts, but I really am like, it's so hard to do like the social media thing for this book. Like, really don't like that. But now I've got to promote this book. So I'm like, damn, I got to be on that Netflix documentary. I met with them. And then, of course, in the selling of the option, it just precludes me from doing anything like that. So, you know, it's so hard to get a movie made. You know, I'll be so incredibly lucky if it happens. And here's this greenlit documentary that would be so good for my book, but I can't do it. But I think, I mean, the thing with these documentaries, though, is the people that you really want to hear from would never in a million years.
Right. They're going to do it when they're like 70.
They'll still be with him when they're 70.
Which is so tragically sad.
I know.
Yeah,
I mean, it's been 20 years, you know?
So what is that? Why can't certain people get away? Because I think that's like, you see it happen in other facets of life where you're like, this person has taken everything from you.
Yeah.
Like humiliated you.
Yeah.
Like you have not gotten a good end of this bargain and you're still.
Yeah. He sniffs out vulnerable people. And I don't think it's something he does on purpose. We were talking about Michael Jackson, you know, my sister, who's a psychologist, she was like, how did Michael Jackson know to, you know, snow the parents? And like, how was he such a skilled manipulator? Like, it's not something you learn. It's just like this innate thing in you. And that's Dove. You know, he's so charismatic. He's a very complex predator because he's not a violent, you know, I'm going to drug your drink predator. But does he, you know, he still has those tools within him. I mean, he still somehow manages to pick these vulnerable people that will stay with him this long. Yeah,
that was understanding that trauma, the way trauma can affect a person. Like I remember I read something that sort of changed. They were like, if you grew up watching your dad beat your mom, right? You're not just seeing this is how men treat women, but you're seeing or even inheriting whatever it is that makes a woman attracted to a person that does that to them. So you're actually getting it from both sides. Like we think it's like, oh, it's just the person doing the overt act that's the problem. But actually it's both, right? You're getting it both. And so, yeah, there must be just some profound codependency in some of these folks that make you go, because again, when the person's on the top of the world, there's an economic logic to it. There's a fun, sexy, good energy to want to be in the bunker with this person.
Absolutely.
Like who marries Kanye West now? You know, like it's that energy. Or even Dove. I mean, Dove's like, now I want to be in the Kanye West business. And you're like, oh, that's because when one tribe kicks you out, to like, it's like if the trendy, cool tribe kicks you out, and then there's the deplorables over here, you know, you'd think you'd be able to exist here because that's bad, but it's actually you can't be in limbo. So you end up being driven into the arms of the other people who your objections to fall away pretty quickly because they like you, and you have a shared enemy, which is these people. Yes, no, absolutely. One of the girls in my book, Carolee, we were talking before she read the book and became angry with me. She was like, you know, I don't feel victimized by Dove. I feel more victimized by people like Roz, who used me. You know, she took a lot of those photos, you know, who sort of used me to impress Dove. And she said, you know, what Dove and I had was something special. I was just like knocked over. Like 20 years later, she's saying this, you guys had something special. You and hundreds of girls, but you had something special. And that's his skill. You know, every girl feels like that. And that's why a lot of them are still with him. He makes them feel special. He made me feel special. I'm sure he made you feel special. Like very much so. Very good at that. Yeah. And I've had to do work on my own child because my sister works for someone nowhere like Dove, but like, on a spectrum of that kind of leader. A lot of corporate culture is like that, certainly in reality television. And my aunt was like, what do you think that is? You know, and I'd never thought about it. And it's interesting to go, oh yeah, so there must be some, what are you doing, Dad? You know, like there's some energy that makes you go, I need this person's approval, or I need them to see me, or I need to be part of that inner circle, inner sanctum, or whatever. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. There was another one, maybe you might like this. I remember one time, did you get called into these like meetings, which weren't really meetings? They were just like 2 hours of ranting. Him ranting. And yeah, I was just going to say a ranting meeting. Absolutely. Yeah. So I would often get called to the ones on the 7th floor of the factory. And I remember It's like, it'd be like, you'd be walking and talking, and then you're in there, and then you'd be like, go get this person, and go get this. And it was like, suddenly you realize,
I'm getting flashbacks.
The whole company has been called in, right? And so I remember it struck me one time, like, nobody's working because everyone's in here.
Yes.
And I said to one of the other creative directors, not Roz, I said, what was that? And she goes, the thing about Dove is he wants an audience a little bit more than he wants to be successful. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, for him, again, the company was the accidental byproduct of wanting the people who have to listen to him, just like, again, like the political career is the byproduct of wanting to be chosen or wanting to be the person with their finger on the button, right? Yeah. And just going, oh yeah, for him, it's this desire to perform, to be the center of attention, to be attended to, that everything else is the by. And so I've just
walking around in this underwear, like perfect symptom of that. Like,
so it's
the show.
But what I've tried to do, especially as I've gotten older, is go like, my job is not to make a character study of this person, but to go, what in this person is similar to something in myself? Like, where do I have things where what I really like to do is be angry more than I'd like to solve the problem? Or you know what I mean? Like, where do I have those tendencies, and then how do I chip away at them?
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Maybe I should start doing that.
I feel like you did it. You did a good job in the book. I thought you especially for a thing that I think you could very easily, for your experience, just be like, in my 20s, I worked at this place. That was it. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like, I guess you had the business cards, but you weren't like, it was your identity to the world. Like, no one would have to know, right? But for clearly, you decided to go back and think about what it meant, what parts of you it triggered, which is what memoir is, right? It's like actually the event. It doesn't have to be actually an action-packed, crazy story filled with hijinks. It's really, what does it mean to you? And then by understanding what it means to you, what does the reader learn about themselves?
Yeah, definitely. Yes. I think when people finish this book with a judgment, how could you?
Yeah.
It says more about them than it does about me, because this book is how anyone can be sucked into that. Here's the gymnastics that I went through. It wasn't a character flaw. It was, how someone can get sucked into a cult, an abusive relationship, and stay for a long time.
Yeah. How does your conscience get chipped away at by your work or your identity or your tribe or whatever?
Yes. How can you become debased without realizing it? How can things just warp before your very eyes?
Well, that's the line in the thing. How do you fool yourself into thinking you can deal in filth and not become filthy?
Yes.
But you can't.
You can't.
Yeah.
It's so true.
There's an expression I heard, like, the things you work on you. And ultimately you're being changed by it as you're doing it,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I got, obviously, because my first book was not really a memoir of American Apparel. It was more like what it meant about the media and that time and place.
That book helped sell my book. I had that
really?
Right at the top of my proposal. I was like, Ryan Holiday pitched this book about working for American Apparel, and look how everyone responded. Well, let me tell you, I have that book.
Yeah, nobody.
My agent was like, put that at the very top. That's going at the top.
It's funny because when that came out, everyone was just super mad at me. Like, they were like I was, like that. There was this. It felt like a lot of shooting the messenger. And I remember going in at some point like, I didn't have to write this book. Like I could have just kept doing it. Like, so this idea that this is like good for me, I don't think you understand how this works. Like, and for people, like, you could have just kept working there.
Yeah.
Like, and you could still be working there now. Like some of these people who basically have sort of jobs for life.
Yes, their lives are their jobs.
Yeah, but I chose not to for a reason. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying I don't have things that I regret or feel ashamed of, or things that like I don't have to answer for. But I'm only answering for them because I told you I did them.
Yeah, that's very true.
Like it didn't have to go this way.
Yeah,
you did not.
True.
I was like, especially that really upset me with the media stuff. It's like, you could have found this stuff out, but you didn't because for your own reasons, you didn't want to know certain things, or it was hard for you to know some things.
Yes.
So you rather just talk about what the ads mean or what they represent.
Yes.
Right. And I really hated that thing where they would go, she she looks barely legal. And it's like, okay, so first off, the phrase barely legal means legal, right? And second, now you're saying it doesn't even, you're saying, you're double confirming that this thing is legal. You're just saying you don't like it, is what you're saying. Yes. You're saying it's weird, which it is, but there's a difference between weird and what you're implying. But like, that's not the issue. As you say in the book, like the issue is that is an actual person, and that the photo is capturing what happened before the things that you should be upset about happened.
Yes.
And by the way, actually, it might not even be a sexual thing that happened. What actually happened is that you have a person making $11 an hour working 90 hours a week.
Yes.
What you think is happening is not what's happening.
Yeah. Yes. That's not the issue here. It's an issue, but it's not the big issue.
So the other thing I've wrestled with, and we can wrap up, but what was always hard for me, so my job was doing public relations for a person who was guilty of stuff. But the tricky part is, and I'm sure you saw some of this, and this isn't a thing that our culture has the ability to handle, especially in a world where we have to say things like believe women because women are often not believed. But some of these people are problematic. Do you know what I mean? And so, like, ultimately, the lawyer who filed most of the lawsuits against Dove ultimately represented him in the lawsuit against the board, where he argued that Dove was innocent of all the things, right? So one of those has to not be true. And also that same lawyer and one of his clients, when I was 21 years old, broke into my email and leaked all of it.
Oh my God.
Like there's a police, there's a whole thing. So like I had this sense of, and I think this allowed me to not see what I needed to see, was that.
Because it's so horrifying.
Do you know what I mean? These were complicated things. It wasn't as clear cut as person did X.
Yeah.
They deserve Y.
And you're 23 when this is happening, when your emails are late.
Yeah, must have been. It was like 2008 maybe. I thought my whole life was over.
Younger than that. Yeah. I can't imagine how dramatic that must have been.
Which, I mean, it was my fault in some ways, but whatever. But the point is, this wasn't Aaron Brockovich shit. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like this was complicated, and that's made it hard for me as I've left to go like, should I, how have you thought about that?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I sort of let myself off the hook a little bit.
Yeah.
I just really feel like he is the one responsible. And I am a victim too. I may not have been sleeping with him. But I like haplessly got sucked in.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
No, I mean, I do. But I mean, also as we wrestle societally with Me Too and Predator, et cetera.
Yeah.
What you saw firsthand in American Apparel is that it was complicated.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Like
absolutely.
Like it was like some of the stuff he got in trouble with was actually was unfair. And then the things that he didn't get in trouble for actually were wrong.
Yes,
and I think that's what fucked with my compass the most is it's like, I happen to know in this instance, I've met you and I was there.
Yeah.
And then in this instance, I saw this other thing and what the fuck was that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And those were separated in some cases by years.
Yes.
And so.
Yeah. See, you worked with him more than I did. He was almost like a larger than life sort of cartoon character to me. So I did see certain dichotomies, but when I thought about him, I just sort of idealized him as this sort of funny, boss that was like me, who wasn't really like a boss. Not like any boss I had before.
Yeah, but then like Mean Girls, I'm not like a mom. I'm like a cool mom.
Yeah, he's the cool boss, for sure. Yeah. I was just totally drinking all the Kool-Aid. It had to take some really dark stuff for me to realize there's like really bad stuff happening here. I stayed.
No,
the refrain.
For me, that was actually one of the breaking points was going, I believed you on these other ones.
Yeah.
And then it kept happening. So even if it's complicated. You are continually putting yourself in the situations, which is unfair to everyone who works here.
Yes.
You know, like even if this is 20% exaggerated, 50%, even if it's wholly made up, you know, there's one way to solve this.
Yeah.
And you can't do that thing. And so for you to circle the wagons and say, let's all protect the thing, it's like, actually, you're the one that is repeatedly jeopardizing.
Yes.
Which is its own sick logic, though. I've seen people say this about Trump. You know, they're like, I believe in what Trump stands for.
Yeah.
The problem is he's not artful enough about it. And it's like, I get it, because it's like, you're a true believer and you think he's the problem because he's jeopardizing, where you haven't gotten to the places you go, this stuff is fucked up.
Yes, this is the wrong stuff.
Yes.
It's bad.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. That is a really, that makes sense.
Yeah. And that he just kept doing it is, again, it's like, even you don't get falsely accused 50 times of something.
No, definitely not. No. Yeah.
That's the other thing, because I wrote the book about media manipulation. I have heard from basically in the intervening 10, 11 years, I've heard from pretty much everyone that's ever been canceled or like accused of something, like against my will in most cases. Like someone gives them the book and then they reach out, and it's you know what I mean? And like in some cases, like people I find like totally abhorrent.
Yes.
And then it was. It's like being this defense lawyer that with time you go, could all my clients be innocent? That doesn't work, you know? And going like, how are you? And you're all saying the same fucking shit, which is not just like, I didn't do it. You're like, I didn't do it, and I'm really the victim. But because they only say that usually to someone who hasn't heard it before. Yeah. It makes sense, right?
Yes.
I got to imagine like someone who's a domestic abuse survivor, the second husband or whatever, the excuses don't work as well. It's with it's when you're in the back and forth with the first person that you don't see how transparently the playbook is being run on you. You know what I mean?
That's true.
So what's the next book?
The next book is, well, I haven't sold it yet. I'm kind of, I work full time. My life is really busy.
I wrote my first 3 books while I was at American Apparel. So.
Yeah.
I know that very well.
Yeah. In fact, if I didn't, it would probably be more difficult for me because I sort of need that structure.
Keeps you honest.
Yeah. Definitely. It's a book, let's see. It's Virgin Suicides meets, you know that documentary Paradise Lost about the West Memphis 3?
Yeah.
So that's what it is.
Okay.
Virgin Suicides in the Satanic Panic era. Oh. And it's a book about corruption and a rumor panic that sweeps this small town that's sort of living in fear already of brown people moving in from Philly and
true
joblessness.
Story?
Yeah, true story.
Wow.
True story. It takes place in 1996, the events. And I'm really looking forward to it. It's a very character-defining story for me. And in a way, it really shows how I could get sucked into this striptease. It's a good prequel.
No, good for you. I mean, that's kind of the playbook I did, which is like, I wanted to be a writer and I knew I had to write about this thing that I'd experienced. Yeah. And I knew it can't be later. Like you have to get it out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think you did it like, this is burning the boats behind you. Yeah, and now you can write about something that you're interested in that is, you know, and you've proven that you can write a book, prove a book that gets reviewed well, that sells well. You've done all that stuff. Yeah. And now you can be like, one for you, one for me.
My passion project. Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Great. That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Anything we missed, you think?
In the beginning, you asked me how I started to write the book.
Yes. And
it's interesting, right after I left, because the story was still, I just knew I would write about these crazy events. Yeah. I started to write a fictionalized version. Oh. And I got about 75 pages in. And then I just sort of lost steam. You know, the company was still, this is in 2009, 2010, I was doing this, and the company was still raring to go. And I sort of just didn't have any perspective. And it really took the Me Too movement happening and just reflection and me, you know, doing something else for a decade. And I always knew it really probably should be a true story because
Yes.
you don't need to make this shit up. Just tell like it is.
Anytime, like when they did him on SNL, there's like a Law and Order episode about. They're so bad. It can't. It's so unbelievable that you can basically only do it as real.
Yeah. Yes.
So I don't think it would have worked.
No,
as a
I don't
novel.
think so either. And some agents were like, "Wait, you should do that." And it was meant to be a true story, and I'm glad I did it now, when I've really had time to think.
It's also just such an interesting period culturally that like is just distant enough, but doesn't quite feel like it's not far enough. There's nostalgia, but just how many bands were coming out then? Like the hipster thing is now in the rear view. Like there's no like hipster. It's because the trend lasted a long time, but like it's kind of Brooklyn feels over. East LA feels over. Like it's now a historical period as opposed to a thing that like now when I say like it used to be, it'd be like I was the director of marketing of American Apparel and people would know what that was.
Oh yeah.
And now I don't even put it in my bio, not because like I'm ashamed of it, but it just doesn't mean anything.
Yeah,
it
doesn't mean anything.
It's like, oh, he was the CEO of Compaq Computers. Yeah. People are like, what? You know, like the word doesn't even have any which to me is the saddest, most tragic part. Like to have something so popular and so big and so ubiquitous.
Yes.
Just
and so much potential for changing an industry.
Yeah.
Like, am I deluded? I still think we can do it again. I mean, maybe not Dove Charney.
Well, I think a lot of people can take, like, I try to run my business. Like, I only make stuff in the US. I try to, I've taken a lot of those principles and how I do it, which he was right about.
Yes.
And I think post the pandemic and then the supply chain crisis, we are seeing a lot of reshoring. People are like, oh, yeah, it's not free to make your stuff 3,000 miles away or 5,000 miles away or whatever.
Like a 12-year-old in Bangladesh, you know?
I remember he said to me once, he was like, you can't buy a bikini for $5 without somebody getting fucked.
Yes.
And like, it's true. Like it does, you can't make an item of clothing for 80 cents. No. It's like, it's just not how it works.
I know.
And by the way, American Apparel stuff wasn't any more expensive than the other shit. So where was that money going for the other brands?
Yes.
You know, it was going to the models and the celebrities and the Times Square store and a bunch of other waste, basically.
Yeah.
No, and then I was like, am I going to read it? Am I not going to read it? And then I was like, I read it and I was like, I read it in a day. I thought it was amazing.
Well, thank you. Thanks
of course.
So much.